Good morning and happy Friday. I told you guys that I was going to show you how to stencil, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. So I wanted to show you guys how I did the headboard in our bedroom. And I know stenciling, it's been around. It's one of those things that's very on trend right now, and there's a lot of people that are doing it on their floors, which is definitely something that we're considering doing in my office. Just to kind of mix things up and just add a little bit of something decorative. The great thing about stencils and the great thing about paint is if you don't like it, then you can just paint over it. With stencils, it does get a little bit tricky because you are essentially adding layers of paint, which can also add a little bit of texture. So do know that if you are going to paint a stencil and then you later decide to paint over it, you're probably going to have to do some sanding to get that design out of whatever it is that you painted on. Which is why when I did the headboard, I didn't paint directly onto the wall, and instead I painted onto this. It's actually what I'm painting on right now, this it's plywood, but I saved the sticker. I like about it, it's underlayment actually. So it's really thin, it's 1/4 inch thick. And it has a really high green rating, which is, pretty important. But it's also primed on one side, which I like because it kind of seals the wood a little bit. And then it's made out of sustainable wood sources and no tropical wood. So it's not something that's depleting wood sources. So I'm all on board with that. Plus it's really easy to use. This underlayment is essentially what we've used in all of our shiplap projects because it does cut. Now it does splinter a little bit, but you just have to sand it down. But it's lightweight, it's inexpensive, and it is a smooth surface essentially. So when we did the headboard, or when I did the headboard, I didn't want to paint directly onto the wall with the stencil so that down the road, if I decided I didn't like it anymore and I just want to remove the headboard, all I have to do is patch the little tiny holes that I use to put the headboard onto the wall, and it's not going to be as big of a deal as trying to cover up a huge stencil. So there's that. Now, I'm going to show you guys a couple of my favorite painting tools. I know I've kind of talked about it in some instances in blog posts, but in case you've missed it, one of the things that I've used for years, the very first painting projects we ever used, I've had this. It's a handy paint pail. And what I like about it, and I'm pretty sure, if you've heard about it, fine, but this is for the people who have never heard of it. What I like about it is if you are doing painting projects, small painting projects, or painting projects in rooms where you're getting up on a ladder and you're trying to balance everything, this is very, let's say, ergonomic in the fact that it puts very little stress on your hand, so you can grip it, but it's held on there pretty tightly. And the nice thing about it is that it comes with this adjustable strap so that if your hands are a little bigger or a little smaller, you can adjust it accordingly. And then, I don't have one, let me show you. What's also really cool about it is if you need to stop for whatever reason, there's a magnet on the inside of this so that you can just put your paintbrush on here. So if you need to move a ladder or you need to do something, you need to rest your paintbrush, you have a place to put it. So that huge magnet on the inside is where you would stick your paintbrush. I don't have one for this one, but they do have drop-in liners, which are awesome. And when you're done with your paint project, you just simply take it out and then you're left with a clean pail. And then if you're painting multiple colors, you can just slide in multiple, like whatever color you're using, pop it out, pop the other one back in, and then you're still left with this tray essentially. Now they have expanded their line, so I think this was like one of the first ones they had that was out, and like I said, I've had this one for years, and it's worked out really well. But they expanded out to the big trays, which I absolutely love, and I left the liner in this one just to show you guys. So again, the same technology with the drop-in liner, which is great. So again, if you're painting multiple rooms and you have different colors going on, you can just pop the liner in and out. It does pop into these little holes, and again, this one also has that magnet. So if you needed to work on some trim work, but then you also had your roller, you can leave the paintbrush in here, and then it has these really nice handles, so it makes it super easy to carry from room to room or move it around, whatever you need to do. And then there's a little slot back here so that if you need to rest your roller, you have a place to put it and it won't roll around. So I really have enjoyed this greatly. And then the last one they had, which I used for This particular project I'm going to show you is a little bit bigger than that smaller one. It also has the hand, so if you wanted to use a smaller roller, you can, a little foam roller, and then it also has that same magnet, so if you wanted to put your paintbrush here, you can. So there's different options. I absolutely love these. Again, this has got the drop-in liner, which is perfect. This one has become one of my favorites because it has that little tiny, so when you're working on a roller and you need to like dab off some of the paint, it's got those ridges in there to kind of help you roll the paint on evenly. So this is definitely one of my favorites. And then on the side here, it's got a place for you to put your roller so that it's not like in the paint when you're doing your project. So I wanted to pass that on before I start showing you guys. So when I did the stencil, I had a lot of people say, I don't know how to do that, which, you know, like I said, stenciling's been around forever. This isn't anything new that, you know, that I'm like, I don't know, breaking ground on anything. It's been around. These particular stencils I actually got from Pottery Barn Teen of all places. But I was looking for the mandala stencil, and what I liked about this particular pack, not only was it on sale, but it also came in 3 sizes. And I knew for the headboard, I wanted that bigger mandala to be huge, and then I wanted to build off of that with some smaller ones. So this particular set definitely helped me, and I used all 3 stencils. Now on the smaller stencil, you can see I only used that center one, and that one I used to kind of fill in some of the spaces on the headboard where there was a lot of like white open spaces. But this essentially was the pattern of what these other 2 stencils were going to be. So it made it a little bit easier for me to kind of figure out the pattern when I was doing the stencil. Now for the bigger one, for the bigger mandala, it's only 1/4 of the actual circle. And then when you do it, and it didn't come with instructions, so I had to figure this out on my own. This center dot was actually, when I was looking at the smaller one, is actually the center dot for the whole thing. So as I painted it and then I moved it around, that was kind of the point where I knew that the stencil was going to line up. And then there was a couple other markers on here as I painted that showed me where to line the stencil up as I moved around the board. So that made it really, really easy for me to figure out, so I didn't mess up the design and it was even. So then the other circles that are around that larger one are this half size, and I just wanted to show you because I had some leftovers of the underlayment that I used for the headboard. So this piece is what was the remaining part off of the headboard that I cut off. After I measured the width of the bed and I measured the board, this is the piece that was left over. So it was perfect for me to kind of do real quick paint, and then that way you could see what it is that I did. Now, as far as stenciling is concerned, there's a couple of schools of thought. My feeling is, you know, you don't want to use, you can use a couple different things. I use painter's tape, and I just use it to hold down the 4 corners. It just makes it easier. The painter's tape, it's strong enough to hold the stencil on, but not too strong to damage whatever surface you're working on underneath. So if you've already painted a surface, like when I painted that surface of the headboard white, I didn't want to pull up that white, so I used the painter's tape, so it's a little bit more forgiving and it doesn't attack your surface. This stencil is heavy enough that it actually holds down, and then the key is when you're painting to not go so heavy with the paint so that it's not seeping underneath. So you kind of want to paint it on and just do a coat, kind of let it dry a little bit, and then move the stencil. And then before you move the stencil, of course, I wipe the back of it just in case there's a little bit of bleeding, because there probably will be. And I don't like to leave the stencil on too long, and this goes with any kind of tape that you use. Anytime you use tape around a room, the second you're done with that part, and you don't want to wait till the space dries before you remove the tape. It helps keep the lines crisp. Same thing with the stencil. You don't want to wait until it's completely dry to move it. One, you don't want your stencil to get stuck to whatever surface you're using in case there is a little bit of seepage. But then also, the longer you leave it there, the more likely you are to have some underneath seepage of the paint. As far as paint's concerned, depending on the surface that you're going to be stenciling, for this I just use regular wall paint. If you're going to do a floor, I've read a lot of articles because I've started my own research on this for what we want to do for the office. A lot of people are using either chalk paint, which I've never really gotten into the chalk paint. I've done a couple little projects. I did one for Rust-Oleum, but I keep going back to just regular paint. But a lot of people that I'm seeing are using porch and floor paint. So it's a little bit more durable, especially for a surface that you're gonna be walking on. And then also the key is to do a couple coats, like 2 to 3 coats of polyurethane that are meant for floors. And that'll help seal the surface and protect whatever it is you're painting. I've heard people do it on linoleum. I've heard people do it on tile. So this, I just did it on the wall. Now my favorite paint right now, and only because it's really super close, is I use the Valspar Reserve. A little bit more expensive when you talk about the hierarchy of paints, but what I like about this is it has a low VOC, which is the low like smell. It's very user friendly as far as durability, long term, and then it's got pretty much like a 1 coat coverage. Not always. I did have to paint 2 coats on the wall, but it was very minimal. So you definitely shouldn't have to go back with a 3rd coat of this stuff unless you've got something crazy, but even still, you'd probably want to use a color blocking primer underneath. And then here's the other thing, and I've said it in a couple blog posts, but just another friendly tip and reminder. So the color that I use for the back wall of the bedroom, and as well as the stencil, is called River Way by Sherwin-Williams. Now, it used to be that the school of thought was you had to get whatever color paint that you found mixed at the store that you found it, and I just got paint on my arm. Mixed at the store you found it, but that's not true. Now, most every store has whatever paint sample that you found. They have access to those colors, so they can essentially mix whatever color you find, and I'm notorious for that. My favorite white color right now is White Dove by Benjamin Moore, and I get that mixed at Lowe's. I've gotten it mixed at Home Depot before. Home Depot is coming. Right now I have to use Lowe's because it's the closest. And I've had Ace Hardware even mix some colors for me that belonged to another brand. They don't give you any crap about it, so it just makes it easier, and I think they would prefer you, if you like their paint, to still be able to get the color. So while this is Riverway by Sherwin-Williams, I had it mixed at Lowe's, and I love the color, and I've gotten a lot of compliments on it. So I just wanted to kind of repeat that same color on this board, just so you can see the contrast between the white and then the stencil. Again, with this particular stencil, it's a little bit heavier plastic. Sometimes when you get into the cheaper or more inexpensive stencils, the plastic can be a little bit more flimsy. All that's going to mean is that when you go to paint it, you may have some problems with some seepage, or whether or not you're going to be able to reuse that stencil. The whole idea is to, if you wanted to, you could essentially reuse a stencil multiple times, and especially if you're going to be using a repeating pattern on a surface as big as like a floor or a wall, you want to make sure that the stencil you're using is of good quality so that you can make it through the whole project without having to replace your stencil. So, enough talking, let's get to painting. So again, I've already looked at this particular design. I made sure that we had plenty of board space to cover both halves of this circle. So we're gonna start out with one circle, and then we'll go to the other one. And I'll try and make it as quick as I can so that you can see what I'm doing. And again, I'm using my favorite handy paint pail, and I'm just loading up my roller with the paint. There are also different schools of thoughts about stenciling and what types of materials to use. And I've got a really funky angle on this. Some people like to use a stencil brush that essentially is like an up and down motion where you go all around the stencil. It lessens your chances of having seepage, but the easier way is the roller. And again, just kind of loading it up, but then I'm trying to take off as much of that paint as possible so I don't have a ton of seepage. You want to go, this thing's struggling with me right now, and you start rolling it on. And you don't want to worry about covering so much the first go round as just getting it onto the surface. And then we're going to come back with a second coat once we let this one dry a little. And I'm not applying that much pressure to this stencil because I don't want it to seep underneath the stencil. So you can already tell, even by just running over this, that I've covered it. Like I said, the paint was really good. It worked really well with the stencil, so loved it. I did have a little bit of seepage in some areas, and that's just because I got close to the end and I was tired because I didn't think it was going to take me as long as it did, and it did. And basically all I did was I came back through with the base white dove and just kind of painted over the areas where there was a little bit of bleeding. And then I did have one little stencil mishap where I forgot to, because again I was tired, wipe off the back of the stencil before I moved it, and so I had a little bit of a shadow effect, so I had to go back through and kind of paint over that too with the white paint. No big deal, you can't even see it, so it's very forgiving. That's the thing about paint, is it's very forgiving. And sometimes if you catch it quick enough, you can wipe it off and you won't even see it at all. The other thing about paint is if you get it on your floor, carpet's not as forgiving, but you can get it up. As a matter of fact, when I was painting the bedroom, I actually dropped a couple droplets on the floor. All I used was a towel and some water, and because it had just happened, I rubbed it out and it came completely out. If you have something that's dried, you can use some, there's some paint removers, but you have to be careful with your carpet that you don't ruin the color. If you have a solid surface like a wood floor, if you just let it dry, you can oftentimes just chip it off once it's dry and you should be fine. So just some little tidbits and some things that I've discovered along the way as far as painting is concerned, because it is by far my #1 favorite way to transform a space, and the easiest and expensive way is through paint. It's just amazing how much of a difference paint can make. It can make or break a space. And we found that out when we repainted the bedroom the first time, because it was way too baby blue and reminded us of a baby shower. We both were like, this is disgusting, but now we love it, and that's all that matters. So again, excuse me, loading up the roller, but trying to get as much off. You can also, if you're using a brush, you can blot it out on a paper towel, just to make sure that you are not getting too much, because too much paint will seep underneath. And you just want to kind of do even strokes along the top of your stencil just to cover it. And again, I'm just trying to show you for time what it's going to look like. And it's not covered 100%, but you guys get the idea. All right, so once you're done with your second coat, this is when you don't want to leave it on there, because like I said before, it'll increase your chances of having seepage, and then you also don't want your stencil to get stuck to your surface. So this is the time you want to go ahead and peel it up, and you want to peel it up slowly, and then there you go. So as you can see, there's the stencil. It isn't very crisp because, like I said, I was just trying to do it to show you, and I did have a little bit of seepage here. Again, not a big deal because you can come back through and make it crisp. It also can kind of add a little bit of character, make it a little bit of worn. One of the things I thought about doing after I stenciled the project was I thought about running over it with a little bit of a sander to kind of give it a more distressed look. That's also a possibility. And if you really want to give it a distressed vintage look, you could distress it and then go back over it with like a stain. So it kind of gets into the wood that's underneath and make it look, you know, pretty rustic and like it's always been there. So before we move this on to the other side, you need to make sure that you wipe the stencil off, because you want to make sure that you capture any of the excess that may have seeped out. And if you're lucky, there's not a whole lot that's seeped out. And then of course you want to let it dry a little bit, because there's going to be points on the stencil, and like I said, this one didn't come with instructions, but I figured it had to have some kind of a reference beside the center point when I looked at the smaller stencil. So there are connecting points so that you know how to line up your stencil. So it's really important to pay attention or read the instructions before you do your stencil project, because every manufacturer is different. Pottery Barn does not specialize in stencils, so I can understand why they probably don't, but a company like Cutting Edge or some other stencil companies are going to be pretty specific about their instructions as far as how the designs and what they recommend doing for each of their stencil projects. So just for sake of time, I'm not going to let this dry, but I'm going to line up that center circle, and then you can see, I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but there is a little, like a little teardrop here and 2 dots here, and then on the other side it's the same thing. So I want to line up the stencil with the center and on these, and then just lay it down. So there are reference points, which is awesome. Now, what you also want to make sure you do is that you don't go over those spots with so much more paint, because you don't want those particular spots to stand out, to be heavier painted than the other spots and the other part of the stencil that you're going to do. If that makes any sense. All right, so once you have your stencil down, you want to make sure you press down all your tape to make sure that it's in place. Again, double check your spacing, make sure that your stencil looks the way that you want it to look, that everything's lined up with your the markers on the stencil from the previous part that you did. And then again, you want to load up your roller. I'm loading it up, and then I'm also taking off the excess, because again, you don't want to have so much, and less is more when it comes to stencils, because you don't want it to seep under. So then I'm just going to start rolling it on. Again, I'm just rolling it. I'm not doing super heavy like you would if you're painting a wall. You definitely want to make sure you're covering, but you don't want to push so hard, because if you push so hard with the roller, it's going to push that paint underneath the stencil, and you don't want that to happen. So you want it to be firm, but not too hard. And then once you get the coverage you want, don't worry about it being 100% covered the first go around, because remember, you're going to come back a second time, most likely, depending on the look that you're going for. So, and then you just keep repeating the process over whatever surface that you're painting. I've seen people do this with multiple colors, which is really cool. It's basically a style preference, and it's just fun. It's just a fun way to dress up a space, to give it a different look, to add some interest, and to give pops of color. Some people, and you can make it look like wallpaper too, which is awesome. Some people don't like wallpaper because they don't like the commitment and the time and the labor of wallpaper, which is completely understandable. Having had a house that had wallpaper in the bathroom, and it was a booger to get it off. And I cursed the previous owners several times under my breath for every time that I had to rip off a sheet of wallpaper and not all of it came off the first time. So it's a love-hate relationship. So this, you can kind of get the same wallpaper look without the commitment of the wallpaper. But again, remember, because we're doing layers of a paint, you're going to have kind of like an embossing look. If I were gonna paint over that headboard, it would look embossed, where you could still see the design poking through, even though you couldn't actually see the paint differences. So if you run into that situation, just make sure you sand over that space before you paint. And I can't read, what are a couple good places to buy quality stencils? So Cutting Edge Design is an online store, but they've got some really cute stencils. They can be a little bit pricey, and then I think there's another online store which also has some good ones. I'll have to look that up. But I've seen some great ones at Joann's. I think it's Martha Stewart maybe has a line, and there's a lot of people that I've seen that have used those, and they actually really like them. Again, it's all about the quality of them, and then how much paint you use. So now I'm going to go back over again to kind of darken up the spaces that aren't as dark when I went through the first time around. And again, firm, but don't push too hard, because you don't want to push the paint underneath the stencil, and that's where you're gonna get your bleeding. And then again, when I'm done with my ruler, I just stick it in the side. I swear to God, I love this thing. And like I told you with the first go around, don't wait until it dries. You're gonna go ahead and pull it up. And just like that, we've got our stencil. So super easy way to update a space. Like I said, I know stenciling's been around forever. It's just one of those things, it's very on trend right now. And it's kind of fun to like see how easily you can make something look brand new again. And again, this is that underlayment that I used for the headboard. And I just painted it with the white dove. And then this is actually the background color, the accent wall color, because I wanted it to look like that hand carved wood, like the accent wall was coming through the paint. And I'm sorry, I gotta get close here. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love it. I was really surprised because I knew what I wanted as far as I wanted the look. I'm holding this up, I need to wipe it off. And I was really shocked to have found it at Pottery Barn Teen. And this particular stencil, like I said, it comes in a set of 3. And I'll show you the other 2. So this is the one I just did. This is the actual full design. So this is what helped me figure out when I was doing this, you know, what design was I looking for. But I only used the center part of it to kind of fill in the open spaces of the headboard. And then this one is the one that made the big circle, and it's a quarter, so it came in quarters. So again, it still had the same markers that were on here as far as the center circle and then this teardrop and these 2 circles. So when I moved it around, I would know like where to line things up, which made it super easy. But again, there was no instructions with this because, like I said, Pottery Barn Teen is not the manufacturer, so that's not what they do primarily. It's just home decor. So I didn't expect them to have it. So that took a little bit of figuring out for me. But most people that are specializing in stencils are going to have instructions as far as what to do and what to line up for your stencil so that you don't mess it up. Like I said, and if you do mess up, which I did have one part of the headboard where it got completely wonky. It was like one of the last stencils I did. And I'm like, no amount of like corrective painting is gonna fix this. So I basically had to come back through with the white paint over it, let it dry, and then re-stencil it. So really easy. And I love it, and I love the way it turned out. So I hope that explains things. Like I said, I had a couple people that were wanting to know how to do the stencil. And I thought, why not show you guys, and this is in the way, why not show you guys how I did it and just kind of give you some tips and my own favorite products of things that I use with paint. I'm always willing to pass that kind of information around because it took me quite a few years to learn a lot of that stuff. So I hope you guys found that helpful. Again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or you want more information, do not hesitate to reach out. I would love to help you out. The possibilities are endless as far as what you could do with this. Get creative. Floors, walls, backsplashes, even furniture if you wanted to add a little bit of extra flair to whatever project you're doing. There are some really amazing stencils out there. There's even murals. There's stencil murals. Don't be afraid to play around with color. I've seen people where they, especially for this one, for instance, maybe I wanted to do the center circle, this one right here, like a dark gray, or I wanted to add some pops of coral, or whatever your color scheme is. Don't be afraid to play with it. And you can even test it out on a piece of poster board if you kind of want to see, like, is this something that, you know, I'm gonna like? Just kind of test it out and figure out your color schemes, your patterns, play around with it and have fun. So I hope you guys have a great day. Like I said, I was looking forward to doing this for you. I'm glad I finally got it out, got it out for you guys today. But yeah, that's all I have. So have a great weekend. Stay safe and definitely stay warm. And I will talk to you guys on Monday. Bye.